Good morning to everybody. I would like to introduce Jayati Ghosh, which does not need an introduction because he's such a very famous economist. He taught a lot in India, but also in the United States at MIT, in Cambridge, and so on. But she was also consultant for UN organization. Her topic is development, but especially I would like to ask her what she think about this new manifesto and on the Renaissance in the economic, which try to discuss and tackle five main points of the economic theory. First of one, the maximization of the preference of the individual, the profit maximization of the firm, the GNP as as an indicator of well-being, which is very poor, but also another dimension that in general the economists look at. There are the citizens, the firm, and the government. The government are trying to push down to choose policy to go to favor the well-being of people. But in this picture, we miss a lot of agent, all the third sector, the activity, benevolent or profit maximization activity. And this is part of the country. And the last point of the manifesto is that, following the example of Jayati, is that the economy should not remain their ivory coast. They should act also as actor of the third sector of the economy, try to communicate more with the people. Okay. Please go ahead, and I will ask you some questions later on.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. It's such a pleasure to be talking to you and also learning about your own work about migration and culture and the relationship with the economy. But I think this manifesto is very important and very needed, very timely, because for too long, I think economists have actually been contributing to, shall we say, some of the problems in economy and society rather than helping to solve them. And that is really a concern. I think that reflects some of the directions in which economics has gone. So, as you mentioned, the idea of the utility maximizing individual, it's not for an accident that it's called rational economic man, because, the basic function is really to look at work, which translates into income and leisure. And so you really are thinking of your choices in terms of optimizing between work that gives income and leisure. If you think of it that way, there would be no unpaid care work in society. Sure. And yet, unpaid care work is the basic bedrock on which all of our societies still rest. So how could we ignore this critical aspect of society and economy by completely leaving it out of any of the rational economic thinking of an individual agent? So that's one aspect of it. But similarly, if you look at profit maximization, again, there were arguments earlier, several decades ago, talking about satisficing firms, talking about different constraints that firms have to recognize. But our focus continues to be on essentially short-term profit maximization. And the problem is that then we structure incentives as well in that way. And we enable markets to generate these short-run incentives, which are often actually deadly even for the medium term. And of course, the way we treat the ecology, the environment, the planet is an obvious example of this, that there is short-term profits to be had. But of course, in the medium term or the long term, it's a disaster. So I'm sitting in Delhi right now where we're having a terrible heat wave. And we're all saying this is the worst, hottest summer we have experienced. But probably this is going to be the coolest summer we will experience in the future. And so why are we not understanding that the way that we are designing the incentives in our markets is actually operating to destroy us all without, so that's another example of this.
Yes, a very short side. Yes, our incentive are very short side. They don't see the effect. Yeah, you're right.
That's
go on.
So these are two of the important elements. But, I think part of this also comes from the way in which economics itself has become a very too homogeneous a discipline. So everybody is taught in the same way, everybody's taught internalizes the same kinds of theories, and then everyone ends up sounding the same. Part of this is also because we don't encourage diversity. We don't encourage diversity in the kinds of people who ask the questions and then question the answers. So we don't put our assumptions to the test with ordinary people, with different people from different social backgrounds, from different classes, from different locations. I have lived in India most of my professional life, and I realized that, the kinds of constraints that our economies face, the kinds of trajectories that they may go through, the kinds of rewards that we may look for and that we don't get are completely different from those, let's say, in the North. But that voice really doesn't get heard in mainstream economics. And instead, even our own policymakers are looking at policies derived from Northern textbooks, Northern assumptions, Northern analyses.
Yes.
I think all of that is very unfortunate.
In your work, you stress that the need to know very well the history of an area to organize a policy there. I would say the culture, the rule of organization of the society. Otherwise, the policy do not work. In fact, we have many policies which are designed for economy, for society that don't exist. And that is after we wonder why the policy is not working. And of course, it is designed for a society that doesn't work like this.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. And I feel that, we, as economists, one of our problems is we haven't looked at other social science disciplines. We haven't looked at the humanities. And we really must. We have to take those insights. We have to use those insights in our analysis of the economy. So, we should be looking at the history of whichever place, location, economy that we are trying to understand. But we should also be looking at that society. We should be looking at the specific social divisions. We should be looking at the institutional arrangements. We should be looking at the cultural aspects.
Yes.
What does
We
it
look
mean?
a little bit, we work a little bit with psychology now.
Yes, but
Behavioral, but the society is not made by individual. We remain linked with the idea of the individual as the person, if neurotic, optimistic,
yes,
pessimistic, and so on. We don't move outside the person. So the society,
yes,
the interrelation, but we live in a world. We don't live alone. We take decision in an environment.
yes. I completely agree with you. And that's my problem with the way in which we are now incorporating psychology. I think, everyone is quite excited that now we're questioning some of the assumptions like rational economic man.
Exactly.
But we are doing that through a methodology that I think is problematic. This whole randomized control trials, the RCTs, this is something that we have taken from epidemiology, when you look at the impact of drugs and so on. But we are using that to derive assumptions about how people behave. And that is a problem because I may behave differently today from how I will behave tomorrow. I may be depending on my context and depending on the social situation I'm in, my behavior may change. So the idea that you can take one result from a test and that becomes, what do they call it? The gold standard. And you can use that result to apply to other contexts, other historical circumstances, other people, or the same people in a very different context. I think that is very problematic. So unfortunately, what we try to do is we're always looking for universal rules and universal axioms. But we have to recognize that these are actually socially embedded.
Yes, we have in general different ad hoc stories.
That's
That
right.
putting them together, we can try to find general trends.
Yes.
But they are each of them embedded in condition. But fundamentally, the economy is constrained by the information. If we don't have data, these don't exist.
That's true.
While instead it exists and we are unable to measure. So we should be able to say that our result is this, but because we are constrained that we don't have data, we cannot count all these things. This change, the variability, the variance is enormous.
You are right. You're right about the fact that we don't have the data in a whole range of things. But I think the problem is even deeper. It is that we don't train our students and we don't train economists to constantly question the assumptions that they are making in the models. Because what we should be telling them is, okay, here is a model of how international trade works. But these are the assumptions. What happens if you drop this assumption? What happens if you drop the next assumption? We should be able to train them to work through that, because reality is like that. Reality is going to have some assumption that doesn't apply.
Yes, critical mind, fundamentally. But the need to be reassured sometimes bring us and the student to get a result. And instead, unfortunately, the complexity dominate.
Yes. I think the problem is that everybody wants that simple result, and then you feel like you know something, that it's like science.
Yes.
But I don't, we are basically kidding ourselves. We are fooling ourselves into thinking that we know something, when in fact it's wrong, because we are basing it on some assumptions that may not apply at all.
Yes, and especially if we go to policy, we base the policy on this assumption. And this is something absolutely terrifying.
Yes.
Because
what is so tragic in our countries, in developing countries, we are still basing our trade policy on Heckscher, Rollin, Samuelson models, which have been rejected even by trade theory, right? Because they have perfect competition, no economies of scale, and so on and so forth. So many completely wrong assumptions. Yet our policymakers still keep, they've internalized this idea.
Yes, and we wonder, sometimes we say that the weak of the political system is that our policymakers are not knowledgeable enough. But sometimes it's better a policymaker who is not knowledgeable, but which has common sense and see what he's seeing.
Yeah. And to recognize the limits of the knowledge. To say,
exactly.
I know that this will work if these assumptions exist and these mechanisms are possible. But if that assumption doesn't exist, it won't necessarily work that way.
Especially, it's much better when you have policymakers which are going against the traditional culture of the country. For instance, I was amazed that Yellen suggested to Europe, when he was minister of the budget of the United States, was suggesting to European countries to tax all the Google, Amazon equally in all the country. Coming from a liberal country like the United States, I was so happy that, but in a certain way shamed that European, which are coming instead from more socialist vision of the state in which the super profit should be, they never tried. And this the big capital, they moved one state to the other where the taxes were lower. They were even competing. And Yellen organized a consortium with all the country to tax the super profit of this major. Not for I would say social reason, because they don't have a national health system, they don't have a national welfare state in the United States, but only because the super profit of this company should contribute to this. They should not move. And this is common sense, and especially she was very brave because she was going against the value of the United States, which is the market, no taxes, no freedom. And I appreciate her vision of the world.
Yes, it's true. But I think another reason why some of even when sensible proposals are made and obvious solutions are proposed, they don't happen. It's also because of a second problem, which is power. We don't recognize this in our textbooks, in our models, even in our understanding of policy. We don't recognize the significance of market power, political power, regulatory power, and how policies will actually end up very differently depending on how that power is exercised.
Absolutely, especially because now the financial power of this big major is so high that they condition states. So there is no, absolutely, they are out of power. They don't feel any control. Also, the legal system, the political system are very weak versus them. And in a certain way, we are worse than in the past. In the past, there was the kingdom, and it was very clear who has the power. He has the political and economic power. And now, instead, they don't have responsibility, social responsibility. We have the legislation, but the legislation are weak instrument. You're right.
And it's convenient. You see, companies can turn around and say, well, it's the market. It's not us. It's the market that's doing all of this.
Yes. But they work in the market. So that's the reason why the action of the Yellen was very important, because taxing this big major is the minimum that can be done, given, and because they have so many profit, so many return for the investment, that tax of 10% is not discouraging them to invest in. So there is not an effect of the tax that discourages the investment. It's too high, they don't invest anymore. No, because it is so large and so on.
But even beyond the super profits, what is really shocking is that the big multinationals pay much, much lower tax. In fact, sometimes they pay zero tax than compared to local companies. So also that is such an uneven playing field. And they are able to do this because they just shift to low tax jurisdictions. So we have to actually plug those loopholes, and we can plug those loopholes.
Organize this international taxation, because otherwise they don't have
I'm involved. I am the co-chair of an independent commission on the reform of international corporate taxation. Joe Stiglitz and myself are the co-chairs, and we have some very good economists: Jose Antonio Ocampo, Thomas Piketty, Gabriel Zuckman. We have a number of very good economists, and we have been arguing for a long time that you have to actually treat the multinational corporation the same way you treat a domestic company. They should not get away with lower taxes than other companies. Just like the wealthy get away with lower taxes than the rest of us. And we need to plug that as well.
Absolutely. In this way, we go back to the traditional model, but used in a social way to redistribute and so on. Okay, is there anything else that you want to wish to us or to suggest to us?
I'm so delighted you're doing this, because finally, I just want to emphasize, I think it's very important to rejuvenate economics. Also because, economics is too important to be just left to us economists. It's important for society, for culture, for everything. We have to recognize all of those other forces, but also we must respond to those forces. And that really means society must force us to be more relevant.
Okay, thank you very much.